Hello, my name is Gillian Tabor. I'm a chartered physiotherapist and I specialise in the treatment and rehabilitation of horses. In this short video, I want to talk you through some ideas about posture of horses and how this can affect them from a pain point of view, a performance point of view, and even from a sort of aesthetic, what we're trying to achieve in how our horses look point of view. But more importantly, I'm thinking of the horse that might have back pain or might have the unfortunate diagnosis of overriding dorsal spinous processes, so kissing spines. So let's talk about this first posture, and I've termed it the inverted posture, but also some people call, a horse that's upside down, their hollow back, sway backed, that kind of position. So here's our classic horse. This is a full thoroughbred that you can see it has some shaved patches over its back, because actually this is a horse that belonged to a client of mine that had kissing spine surgery. So let's have a look at his posture, and he's stood in a fairly typical way for him. He's relaxed at this point, and I can say that he wasn't in pain. This is post-op, and he had been assessed by myself. But there's some clues here as to how he's been moving for a little while. Over his top line, so the region sort of between his ears to his withers to the top of his pelvis, and then from the pelvis round into his hindquarters, you can see that he doesn't have a huge amount of muscle. He actually, when you look at him, has quite a concavity. So there's quite dips either side of the main central point of the spine, those spinous processes, sort of right underneath the saddle region. And some people call these sort of pockets behind the shoulder blade, where it's really hollow and the saddle dips in down in there. The other thing that you can notice is the position of his head and neck, and unfortunately his ears are back, and that is purely a reflection of being distracted by something behind him. It's not a sign of discomfort at this point as far as we could tell. So we must remember that we can't take things in isolation. This horse was in rehab and actually had started to work really quite well, and as we wanted post-operatively. But if you look at the base of his neck, he doesn't demonstrate the worst that I've seen, but the muscles on the base of his neck. So if you draw a line roughly from the buckle of the head collar down to the sort of through the middle of his neck, there's more muscle on the lower half of the neck than there is on the top half of the neck. And that's something that horses in this inverted posture actually demonstrate quite a lot. Now, what we don't know is cause and effect of this. So let me just go to a silhouette of a horse moving. And as I said, we don't know what's cause and effect. Does the horse have back pain? In which case, what it does is it tightens up the muscles through its back. They go into tension deliberately, or I should say subconsciously, but the body's deliberate attempt at trying to sort of protect its back. And the tension then creates more extension, more hollowing through the spine. And then the spine loses its range of motion, because anything where you've got muscles in tension, the normal fluid oscillation swing of the back can't actually happen. So we end up then with a horse in a hollowed back position as it tries to move. Then the way that a horse should generate movement is through the propulsion, the push of the hind legs. So the legs should come underneath the body and generate that forward thrust. But when the back is in extension, what we find is that the pelvis is rotated, it's tilted forwards. And that means that the hip joints and the position of the hind legs are then more in a sort of a hind position. They are then out behind the horse. So the horse, if it was a dressage horse, we'd say that it sort of lacks engagement, or certainly, if you've got something that's trying to jump, then they're going to struggle to come underneath them to push up. And then the horse tends to just sort of hurdle and throw itself forward. So in that way, the hind limb isn't engaging. And then the consequence of that further forward through the body are that the abdominal muscles then either struggle to contract, so you end up with a switched off abdominal muscle region, and then you see those horses with a big, what looks like a big bloated tummy, but in fact it's not, it's low muscle tone. Or you get the horses that are what sort of traditionally termed as herring gutting, where the abdominals are really fighting, they're switched on, they're overactive, where they're trying to hold the spine again rigid and fix it. But either way, we're not going to get the normal swing through the ribs, that rotation, that side flexion as the horse steps through from the hind limbs. Then another consequence is that to be able to move the forelimbs, rather than being lifted up through the trunk between the shoulder blades, through the thoracic sling, the horse then has their body sort of driven forwards and down onto the forehand, and they're a little bit sunk through their thoracic sling. And so they don't get the push off the ground. That then means that the body's not lifted up and the forelimbs aren't then free to step forward. If we think about an advanced dressage horse, we think about this idea of it being sat behind, the hind legs being engaged underneath the body, the feet coming underneath the center of the mass, rotating the body upwards, lifting it up. The thoracic sling is then engaged, lifted up, and then the forehand can move. And it's not just dressage horses. If we think about horses playing in the paddocks where they're throwing their front legs out, doing the movement of Spanish walk, they are then lifting and moving in front. And even horses on other disciplines, thinking about a horse, a horse working Western in cutting, they have to switch direction with their forehand, and if their body weight is all down and in front, they cannot do that. If we think about a horse barrel racing, going around corners at high speed, again, if it is just driven down onto the forehand and the back is fixed and rigid, how is it going to move at high speed around the corners? There's lots of sort of requirement for it. The only thing that it might be advantageous to have a stiff and rigid back like this is racing. Generating speed, going very, very fast, requires no loss of sort of energy through the body. So actually having that rigidity through the back is something that is quite useful. And also they don't engage their hind limbs. Their hind limbs are all about pushing, generating forward thrust by the hind limbs going out behind them. So it might be why this is this sort of posture, or these problems are a connection with racehorses. But anyway, as a consequence of trying to move the forehand that's driven down into the ground, the horse has to overuse those muscles on the base of the neck. And then you end up with this overdevelopment of this, the muscles on the base of the neck. And the names of those are brachiocephalicus sternocephalicus and sternohyoideus. And also the pectoral muscles aren't working effectively. So those are the ones on the front of the chest, on the bow of the boat, as it were, around the sternum. So this illustration here just shows you those highlighted areas of tension and overuse of the muscles. So dominance of these muscles means that the horse is not going to be able to work with a lengthened top line and sort of correctly active underline. That ventral muscles aren't going to be working well. The horse is not going to be able to step under itself and engage and lift up through the thoracic sling. Now, we know we've got some research onto this as well. I'm not just making this up. We know that from this article by Berner et al. That was published in the Equine Veterinary Journal, that actually when the head is raised, like the picture on the bottom left, you end up with the spaces between those thoracic dorsal spinous processes becoming closer together. And that is going to put you at risk of overriding dorsal spinous processes, so kissing spine. So this is something that we have to be concerned about. And conversely, if your horse has back pain, then this might be the posture that they want to adopt, because this actually is their sort of self-protective mechanism. They're motivated to stay in this position, because if they lower the head, they're going to actually then stretch through the muscles that are working really, really hard to protect them. So it can become this cycle of sort of protect and stability, and therefore lack of motion, and leading to spinal pathology, rather than the actual posture being positive and beneficial to the horse. So here's a short little video of my horse, so he's starting here with his head and neck relatively low, and then I'm asking him to lift up. And what I want you to just appreciate here is that actually his body weight shifts as well. He doesn't go into the extremes of the position, but as he goes up higher, you can see that there's rotation of that rib cage and then alteration through the thoracic sling. If he was ridden in this position with his head up, you can also see that actually the base of his neck is switched on and overactive. You can see that if you look at his lower neck, you can see those muscles bulge out, and then there's a slight sort of hollowing of his neck between the withers and the ears. When he goes down lower, you can see that the muscles of the base of the neck switch off, then the trunk rotates in the opposite direction. So just in summary then, the effect of the head and neck being in this raised position and the body and the posture of the horse being in an inverted position actually has a consequence on the biomechanics as I've described. But the main thing that we have to be concerned about is when the horse's head is high like that, then we get the spaces between the spinous processes being narrowed. Or if they are narrowed and we have pain in that region, then it might be that it's a consequence of that the horse adopts this posture to try and protect itself. So that is the sort of what about why we are concerned about the horses working with that sort of upward high head and neck carriage. And that is even without considering putting the weight of the rider on board and then having those additional consequences of perhaps encouraging more extension, more hollowing in that position. And then the next question is what to do about it. Well, I'm going to talk about other postures in other videos, but if you want help with addressing it, then you can get in touch with me. It's via my website, which is gilliantable.co.uk, or I'm on Facebook, Equine Physio and Rehab, and also on Instagram. So do have a chat. But there's plenty of information out there about in-hand work, what to do and how to do it, and the steps that you can take to try and adjust that posture. But I would say that if your horse is in that position and you haven't considered it, then look for the idea that it might be pain that is producing the posture, and therefore we need to address that first before we can do anything to change the way the horse moves.